Life imprisonment for 22-year-old Ali Bashar, the toughest sentence allowed under German law. The judge said he had shown neither compassion nor remorse. In May 2018, Bashar raped and murdered Susanna F. 2 weeks went by before any trace of her was found. Police discovered Susanna's body next to a railway track in a hole covered with dirt and branches after they received a tip from another migrant who had been living with Bashar. The rejected asylum seeker and his family fled to northern Iraq, but he was arrested there and handed over to German authorities. He confessed to killing Susanna, but denied raping her. During the trial, Susanna's father said he was shocked by Bashar's unrepentant, misogynistic remarks. So were others. For him, a good girl is a girl who doesn't go out alone, who cooks and cleans, who obeys the man and has no desires of her own. And that is exactly what he practiced here. Right-wing populists have seized on the case, saying it shows the government's migration policy has had disastrous consequences. Authorities had denied Bashar asylum, and he was supposed to have been deported long ago. The seriousness of his crime means he's unlikely to be released early. Ali Bashar also faces another trial, this time on charges of raping an 11-year-old girl.
Let's get more from DW's chief political correspondent, Melinda Crane, who's been following this story. Welcome, Melinda. Despite this life sentence, people are still concerned and saying that it's too lenient. Why?
One of the harshest sentences that a German court can hand down. Life sentences don't necessarily mean here in Germany that a convict spends the entire rest of his life in prison, and that's because the country's constitution places a very strong focus on human rights, and many criminologists view such lifelong sentences as problematic in terms of human rights. But the fact is that in cases of exceptional severity, where the crime has been especially heinous, a court can say that it is basically excluding any possibility of early parole, as is often given after about 15 years of life sentence, thereby ensuring that the convicted person does remain in prison for longer. And that's the case here. This court said we exclude the possibility of early parole, thereby handing down what is, in fact, a very strong sentence. And I think most commentators definitely do see it that way.
Now, this is a killing that sparked quite a heated debate here in Germany about the country's asylum system and its failure to deport rejected asylum seekers. So presumably there has been much political fallout.
Well, in fact, there was a great deal of discussion at the time that the case began, that the crime was committed, with Germany's largest tabloid, for example, running a headline that said, if he had been deported, she would still be alive, showing pictures of Ali Bashar and his victim. Far-right groups picked up on the debate, and in fact, the government then did engage in a very rigorous examination of its entire migration system, but especially of the provisions that concern deportation of migrants who have applied for asylum and been refused, as was the case with Ali Bashar and his family. The procedures have been tightened up since then, and if you look at public opinion beyond the far right, in fact, many German citizens no longer would put migration and deportation issues at the top of their concerns. The far right, nonetheless, does still very much instrumentalize this topic.
And on the wider issue, there's been a growing narrative about criminality amongst asylum seekers here in Germany. What do the facts say?
Here, the evidence is somewhat contradictory, or let's say complicated. You may remember that about a year ago, President Donald Trump weighed in on this with a tweet saying that crime rates in Germany had drastically increased since the influx of migrants. That is simply not true. Crime rates in Germany have been falling ever since the early 1990s, as the Chancellor, in fact, pointed out in response to Mr. Trump. Nonetheless, there are some studies that show that there has been an uptick in violent crime in some regions, and that some of that uptick may be associated with migrants. The main reason for that is amongst the migrants were many, many young, unaccompanied men. Young men account for a much higher proportion of crime in general than other groups of the population. So the fact that the migrant population includes a disproportionate number of young men is one reason that in some regions we have seen that slight increase in violent crime.
Chief Political Correspondent Melinda Crane, thank you.